Welcome to C2 Primetime presented by RBC. I'm your host, Thomas LeBlanc. C2 Primetime is a show to inspire and inform the C2 community when it comes to the biggest questions in terms of culture and business. We spoke to the Executive Vice President of Léger, Christian Bourque, to really understand how the intersection of policy, public health, and business really impacts our lives. Here's what he had to say.
Hi everyone, my name is Christian Bourque. I'm Executive Vice President at Léger. One of the things about this pandemic that is, I would say, positive is our adoption of digital during the pandemic. I would say we probably jumped ahead 5 years in terms of digital adoption in a matter of 6 months. So as consumers, we want to do more and more ourselves. And I think brands will need to adapt to this new way of doing things, is that whether you're a small local coffee shop to a big brand, you will need to be data-driven. You will need to better understand how to reach your customers and potential customers, how to retain them over time. And basically, I think sort of your one channel or omni-channel strategy needs to be now. That digital transformation or revolution that consumers actually went through, you need to go through that same revolution as a brand yourself. Many of us are probably relieved at the outcome of the American election. However, we need to look back and look hard at the past 4 years and see how Donald Trump has not only changed America or Canada, but also changed the world. We see now that countries, when you look inside and how people sort of view social consensus within a country, this has changed forever, I believe, because of those 4 years of Donald Trump. We are growing or growingly seeing that there's an erosion of a form of social consensus that we used to see back if you back up 10, 15, 20 years. Most of us were roughly in the middle of the distribution of ideas in a society. We tended to focus and centralize around some form of social consensus that we agreed with. If we did disagree, it was at the margins of that consensus. Now what we're seeing is two solid blocks of citizens in our countries growing actually further apart day by day. And I think this is something, and that's the heritage of the Trump years, is that more and more we're seeing that we are divided. America is divided, but not only America. One that I would like to point out and that we measured throughout the pandemic is now over a third of Americans fundamentally believe in most conspiracy theories that are out there. But still, close to 20% of Canadians feel the same way. Close to 25% of people in France believe most conspiracy theories that are out there as well. So we are seeing it in that more and more people are deciding to basically be sort of off the grid. And to me, this is certainly cause for concern. Well, another heritage of the Trump era is that everything is political now. So as a brand, you have sort of no choice to participate in that discussion. You can do it very overtly. We saw a lot of brands over the past few years, and certainly during the pandemic, and mostly the Black Lives Matter movement, actually take a stand on that issue, both internally with their own staff, but also externally to the public. I think that's a great way of doing it. But it's not the only way that you can get involved in that sort of political conversation. The other way you can do it is to allow your clients to vote with their wallet, to actually take a stand by buying your product or your service. There needs to be something about what you're offering to the public that allows them to bring meaning to what they're buying. And I think that's important now more than ever. We were already seeing those trends before with buying local, being more responsible with what you buy, what you purchase, and how you use it and reuse it. And I think those trends were basically just accelerated because of the pandemic. Because again, that search for meaning, for something that's meaningful in our lives, is ever more important today in this time of crisis. So I think that's this second way of allowing people to make a political or take a stand by buying your product or not is something that will become extremely powerful and useful for brands. Right now, when we measure it, we've measured it every week since the start of the pandemic. 36% of Canadians say that their state of mental health is excellent or very good. And that's not very good. If we compare that to pre-pandemic times, we were at about 58% on average in terms of Canadians saying that their mental health is excellent or very good. So there's been quite a dramatic drop during this period of crisis that we're going through. If you look at it, 51% of Canadians say they feel more anxiety now than prior to the pandemic. 23%, 1 in 4 Canadians say they have trouble sleeping due to the pandemic. So, in fact, and the numbers are almost the same in the United States. So basically, roughly speaking, we have been hurt by this crisis. And I think this will leave a trail over time. And brands need to recognize that customers walking out of this pandemic will be less patient, less confident, and will need to be pampered more than ever. And this goes again to your positioning, your messaging, your packaging. Everything about your brand needs to recognize that as a society, we've suffered during this crisis. And it's basically, there's something about this pandemic that has attacked our soul, and brands need to recognize that. A lot rides on the whole vaccine issue. Certainly, we're looking at 2021 to be a year of some form of reconciliation. It's true because of the outcome of the American election, for one, but it's true also that once we're able to get out again, people will want to rekindle sort of this feeling of being together. So I think 2021 should be a positive year, even though the economy is still struggling. There's been a loss of jobs. There's been sort of a loss in terms of our capacity to invest in our workforce. However, I do think that once we get this started, there'll be sort of quite a bounce back, much that we saw in 2010, 2011, after the 2008, 2009 crisis. So I think that the bounce back I expect in 21, 2022 will, however, be different. It's not like we'll all start traveling worldwide again. What we'll want to rediscover, because this crisis has brought us back to our core, because we're stuck inside all the time, is basically we'll want to care for each other. I do believe that we're heading into an era of small is beautiful. What about my neighborhood? What about my street? So I think people will first look close to them at what they can do, and look less potentially at the big picture, but they'll look at making the little picture be better.
What happens to all the stories and pictures that we post online? If you're like me and think about this night and day, well, you're in luck, because today we have a conversation with David Carroll. He's a global expert when it comes to data collection, privacy, and democracy. He's an associate professor in media design at the Parsons School of Design at the New School in New York City. And here's what he had to say on the subject.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. My name is Miriam Guskin, and I'm a science and technology reporter with C2 Montreal. Today, I'm really delighted to be speaking with David Carroll. He's an associate professor of media design at the Parsons School of Design in New York City. I wanted to start with a question about your film, as well as another recent film on big tech called The Social Dilemma, which I've heard a lot of conversation about. They both sort of show how data is being used to influence us, and some, I guess, would even say manipulate us. With all this kind of climate and discussion around big tech, what do you think that really signals for the future of how big tech operates?
Yeah, I think that 2016 was a pivotal year in which attitudes changed about tech suddenly and broadly. That before 2016, the general attitude was tech can do no wrong. And then after 2016, people started to ask, what are the wrongs that we are not worried about and need to be concerned with? And so that attitude hasn't changed. If anything, it's broadened into areas beyond privacy, into just what we're seeing now at the antitrust issues, or the issues over the debates over speech and harms of speech. And so the tech industry not only has not recovered from 2016, but has, only continued to increase its sort of portfolio of liabilities. And the days of a reckoning are upon us. And I think the days of being an unregulated industry are over. That for the first 20 years of this industry, it was always, don't regulate us, you'll harm our innovation. And those days have come to an end, and all industries eventually get regulated, and it's just a natural process. And there are many industries that continue to innovate even though they're highly regulated. The automotive industry is one example. A very regulated industry, and every year new cars come out better than the last ones. And I would argue that the tech industry hasn't really innovated since this scandal erupted in their face. They've spent most of their energy cleaning up the mess, and they have not been coming out with new amazing products and features. They've just been mitigating and remediating.
It's kind of a tricky thing. You say sort of the day of reckoning is upon us. As a user, it's difficult to think about, because in the current climate, and you and I, we're using technology to communicate, and in the age of COVID that we're in, we've become even more reliant on technology than before. So how do you see that reliance playing into what happens going forward?
This will be the interesting thing to watch play out in the antitrust case in the US, with especially regards to Google, because most people enjoy using Google. Most people don't understand the harms that are caused by being dependent on it. So the US government and the states that are suing Google have a tall order ahead of them, trying to demonstrate harm to consumers. But the harm is sort of beneath the surface. It is in, not having viable alternatives, or having the defaults set to Google so that competitors, for example, such as DuckDuckGo, which offer a more privacy positive alternative, really don't stand a chance in competing. Or these special arrangements between the companies, the way that Apple has paid billions of dollars to make Google the default search engine. All these things are going to come into play, and the debate over whether or not it's harmful to consumers is going to be difficult. But the average consumer has no visibility into these issues to really understand the potential harms. And this is not even talking about the business side, the advertising ecosystems, where Google and Facebook have dominated the digital advertising market, which has in turn driven up the cost of advertising, which in turn, people pay for when they pay for products. We pay for advertising when we buy products and services. So it's a very complicated business system, and the companies are dominating both the consumer and the business side of the equation. So it's not going to be the same kind of typical antitrust monopoly discussion. But the United States broke up AT&T many decades ago, and at the same time, people probably had similar sentiments. I like the way my phone works. I make a call and I get to talk to somebody, just like someone you asked today. I like Google search. I search for something and I find it. But it was ultimately a net benefit to break up AT&T. So, will YouTube be spun off from Google? We don't know. But these are the kinds of debates that will happen, and it will be important for consumers to tune into these conversations, because it will help educate really what's at stake.
How much of the responsibility do you think lies with the user?
Well, there's interesting research done on this attitude. Researchers call this sentiment the trade-off fallacy. That is, people don't have any visibility into the system to even make an informed assessment of these questions. So you just get resigned to sort of surrender to it. It's much more comfortable to say, oh, there's no harm, I have nothing to hide, because you have to confront the anxiety of not even knowing what is there. That was some of the basic ideas of the case that I pursued is, can we even see the data to know if we should be worried? And the struggle that, I had to endure shows that even when we have the law on our side, we cannot see into this system. So it's understandable that people resign themselves to defeat, and the research shows that this is the case. Other research shows that when people learn how the targeting actually works, they don't like it anymore. But I think it's ultimately a false choice that people can quit these platforms because they're so dominant, because viable alternatives don't exist. It's really a luxury and a privilege to be able to quit these platforms. Many people could not afford to. So I would never pressure someone into quitting or thinking that that is a viable political act. That the most viable political act is to do democracy and to tell your elected representative that you want these companies to be regulated and the enforcement to be muscular. That is the thing that they fear the most. The advertisers will always come because the people have no other place to go. And so there's no way to actually injure these companies' business models, because the boycotts are just completely symbolic or just a PR headache. They don't affect the bottom line. The only thing that will affect the companies is enforcement of regulation.
Well, thank you so much for having a chat to C2. It's been great to talk to you.
Great to be here, great to participate, and thanks for the great questions.
Thank you so much, David, for this really important conversation about the future of democracy. And thank you for watching C2 Primetime. One final suggestion, check out our conversation with Luca Locatelli. He's a photographer who's worked with the New York Times and Time Magazine, and he's a passionate advocate for sustainability and the zero waste movement. Until we meet again, stay safe, take care.